There are so many things you can write about, but also so many ways to write about it. Let's talk about a couple now. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you are. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen. We are your hosts at Books, Banter, and Beyond. And today, got a cool little roundtable going on talking about some various styles of writing. So this kind of stuff we're going to talk about is kind of things you would see on the back end, not necessarily a genre specific, but just as interesting, I think. And I know I, as a literature graduate, had to study a lot of this for no other reason than it was just part of the deal,
Yeah.
right? Not the most intriguing, but they are actually really cool, and I think a lot of people use this stuff to read. So, jumping in, our first topic is what is a literature review, and this is actually a very common Google question because a lot of people aren't sure what the term means. I myself, even though I'd studied it, still don't. It's one of those words that you know what it is, but you just kind of don't get the feeling unless you do this for a living, right?
Yeah.
Um, were you aware of what a literature review
No,
was
I've
before?
actually never heard the concept before.
All right, well, perfect. So we both get to learn something here. So, according to the internet, a literature review is a critical summary or evaluation of existing scholarship, research, or literature on a specific topic. Sounds very fancy, but
Okay.
I think it's pretty much just a way of saying it's a specific description on some sort of idea, whether it's pure literature or possibly a topic that goes with the literature itself. And it serves different purposes, usually academic, which is school related,
Hmm.
or research for those who are just doing that. So, first off, it helps to establish the state of knowledge and understanding of that topic at hand. So, whether it's, let's say, a deep dive on what science fiction means to the real world in terms of, let's say, robotics, it gives you all the details that you would need to understand why it's important, I guess. So it's kind of like how when you and I do our research, we're getting all of the pinpoints to why we're discussing what we're talking about and why, you guys listening should probably have an idea of why we're sharing, basically. So
Okay.
it sounds complicated, but I think it's
It,
probably simpler than I.
and I guess by doing that, it also it makes the foundation for our expertise, in that we know what we're talking about, right? Because we did the
Makes it
research.
sound smarter, right? But no, you are right. It does definitely bridge the gap, which is the second part of this, of any areas that maybe we didn't know, or maybe we did know, and we're just kind of sharing our
Mhm.
expertise, depending on what it is. And then, lastly, it gets you familiar with what you're doing. So most of the time, these reviews are used as secondary resource, but I think you can also use them for genre specific if you wanted.
So, what kind of challenges? What are the challenges that researchers are facing when they're conducting their quote unquote literature reviews?
I think probably the hardest part for them is writing something that the regular person is going to be interested in reading. There's obviously areas of expertise like, let's say, medical or science where you get very clinical and you use words that most people aren't going to use on a daily basis. That's not going to trigger somebody to go, "Ooh, let's pick up this article." Because me, like, specifically, if I don't know what I'm reading, I'm probably going to put it down. So I think the biggest challenge, at least on the end of the researcher, is how can I do my research, how can I explain the topic, but more importantly, how can I get you to keep reading my work and not put it
Mhm.
down and go,
Right.
what are you talking about?
Right. So, how do you think researchers are ensuring that they're even like being unbiased and comprehensive? Because that's in today's world, especially, but I'm sure all the time How do you?
That's, I mean, the hardest part. I think even, whether you're writing a story or whether you're writing a review, I think the hardest part, in terms of the writing part is writing in a way where you're not making somebody think a certain way. You're kind of just
Just the facts.
exploring.
Just the facts, ma'am. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, just the facts. But yeah, I think it is difficult depending on the topic, like you just said. If it's a persuasive conversation that might be a little too touchy, you do have to make sure that you're writing flat and you're not necessarily doing one or the other. You're just kind of going, hey, the topic is XYZ. This is ABC. That's it. No.
So I'm wondering, would this sort of be like when professionals will do get published? They will do, they're either doctors or whatever, they're scientists, and they will get published by providing documentation, research, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it provides that foundation. It also sets them up as the expert. I'm wondering because I've never heard it. That's not referred to as a literature review, but in fact, it's a review, what people are doing. So I'm curious, do you think there might be a similar?
I think for the purpose of this one, the word review, I think, is the most important part of the phrase, because as I'm noticing as we're talking, even though it's a literature review, there's still a lot of science behind it, and it's not necessarily just as simple as saying, "Hey, I read a book. This is what it's about."
You have
The
your
end.
resources, you put
Yeah,
your
you.
resources, and that's when people, yeah, so it's like the backup, all the backup info you need to prove that this is not just an opinion piece. It's not an opinion piece. It's in fact a very specific factual piece.
Yes, and that's, I think, one reason why my classes had me do this so much is
Right,
because they were trying to get me to not just read the book, but also put the effort into entering the whys and the hows
got
of
it.
whatever the thing may be. It's really interesting. It's still not one of my favorite things to do, but I definitely, after doing the work, I do see how this is a critical piece of information for anybody who's studying literature,
Right,
books, author, stuff like
right,
that.
right.
And then from this one to our second part, kind of interesting idea here. Did you ever think that a newspaper and a novel could be one and the same? I
Depends
kind
on
of
what
didn't.
newspaper. It depends on what newspaper.
It's but right. I kind of didn't, but after reading, I actually had that light bulb moment. Really, the only difference between what you're reading in a paper versus a book is possibly the names have been changed. What's really funny about reading a newspaper article is you're reading somebody's interpretation of an event going on. So, for instance, let's say like the fires that are just happened. When you're reading an article about it, you're reading it through the eyes of somebody seeing it. Switch to a novel that might have a similar theme, let's say a natural disaster, you are also reading a book
Interesting.
or a story through the eyes of the person writing it. And when you think of it that way, yes, of course, there are things obviously in a paper that you have to do that you don't do in a novel and vice versa. But if you think about it at the crux of what an article is and a story is, all you're doing is sharing the idea through one set of lenses, so to
Right,
speak. Um, and you can break it down to things like, for instance, when a journalist is writing the article, they have to go through the themes of the story. They're saying, okay, what is the theme of the story? They have to go through the characters of the story. And in the article, the characters would be the people who are involved in said story, right? You move to the novel, same thing. The author has to talk about the themes of the story as well as the characters who are participating in the narrative. So I think this is really cool, and it
yeah,
even for someone like me who doesn't read the news a lot, it does put a perspective that if you go into either or, just look at it as if you're reading a synopsis of somebody's vision. You're
right.
reading.
But I do do newspapers and novels differ in their approaches to this whole thing? I mean, I think they do. I think that they, in a newspaper, you're supposedly, again, just the facts, ma'am, with hopefully That's what it is. In a novel, even though I agree with everything else that we just talked about, in a novel, you can take literary license. You can, I think that's the term, right? Literary license.
Uh, yeah, there's another word for it, but that's the
You can,
right.
so your hero or your heroine in the not the heroine, you know what I mean. Um, in the story, it could would you because you in a novel you can embellish.
Right.
In a newspaper, hopefully you're not embellishing, and I think that's my point. Is that it's you're not embellishing. It's and that would be the very for me particularly, unless you want to debate me on this, is that is the distinct difference. That there are so many
I
similarities, but in fact there is a very distinct difference at the end of the day. But we're only talking about similarities, so I get that. But there are definitely some
No, I mean you're right. I would say, yeah, you're right. The main thing that differs between the two is that you would hope that in the article for the newspaper, it's legitimate information, it's the right information,
right,
and it's truthful. Um, but yeah, and but also I can similarly say at the same time too that difference also makes it similar as well because again, like you were saying in the book, a creative license. That's what they call it, creative license.
yeah,
Um, they can overdo it, underdo it, depending, and you can get away with it because it's fiction. But excuse me, we've talked about what was it? Books based on real
right.
events.
Rip from
Why
the
always?
headlines. Yeah, rip from the
And there you do have to, well, I mean, not have to, you need to write the story, but you can, if you are the person who happened to, if you're the person who walked down the
right,
Pacific Coast, you can share it in a way that is through your vision. It
right,
may not make sense or it may not be exactly what somebody else would think, but it
right,
is your story. So,
right. And in using your example of the fires, that's a perfect example because there were many people that reported for newspapers and publications as they
uh-huh,
were walking down the road filming what they were seeing, or they were residents that were coming back to the house that happened to also live there, and also they were reporters, so they were expressing their everything that
right,
was going on, that it was absolutely real, but it also was interspersed with the person who was reporting it. And so,
right.
right, that would be the, I think, the
So yeah, it is. So your point actually really interesting because the difference and similarities kind of come together in this because not only do you have to separate the two, you can utilize writing styles for both to do the same to make
right.
the same purpose.
So, do you think that digital advancements have affected this?
Yeah, I think if we've done anything so far with all of our videos, we've shown that as the time has gone on, the more media you have, the more online you have, the more phone you have, the more things are changing. So whether it's for like you're saying, helpful to have the visual of somebody walking down the street filming, or maybe the not so helpful and having people, pop
Right,
things into stories that aren't true. Either way, the advancement of this digital age, as we call it, I guess,
right,
has definitely changed writing in general. And depending on who you ask, you could ask the authors, you can ask the reporters. It could be good, it could be bad, but it's definitely changed
right,
um, overall.
right. Well, all of you who are viewing right now, we'd be curious to hear what you think and go and visit the next chapter bookstore.shop. There's, again, it's a gently used bookstore. And so you're going to get some really great titles at really great prices. Go check it out. Any last thoughts, Rob, before we say goodbye to everyone?
I think, another important thing other than reading the book is really learn about it. If you want to understand why somebody wrote something, search it, check them out, see who the person is, see where they're coming from. You might actually appreciate their writing a little bit more.
Right. I agree. I agree. Guys, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the next Books, Banter, and Beyond. Goodbye, everyone.